As if I need a microphone. Senator Mazza, how are you? My goodness, good to see you. First of all, I want to welcome everybody and thank you all for coming here today. So who am I? I'm Bob Stannard. I just realized as I was driving up here, it was just 40 years ago last month was the first time I walked into this building as a state rep. And it'll be 10 years in May that I retired from being in this building, and I haven't been here since. And it's changed a little bit. Kind of nice to be back on some level. I'm here because, along with these people that have joined me today, in support of H31. It's a House bill introduced by Seth Bongartz, calling for a moratorium on spraying our lakes with toxic herbicide chemicals in our never-ending quest to kill milfoil. Why do we need a moratorium? A great injustice has been forced upon Vermonters and the lakes that they own. Vermonters own our lakes. The permitting process that we go through, in my opinion, is unfair. In a meeting with Secretary Moore back in March of last year, many of the people that are here today were at that meeting, and we learned that it only takes one person and $500 to file an application to spray any lake. And if you read the statute, it doesn't even say that you have to be a Vermont resident. Anybody can file an application to spray our lakes. Once an application is filed, the DEC is then obligated to address it and deal with it. The DEC may accept input from other departments, but they're not under any obligation to act upon their recommendations. The DEC may accept comments from the public, but they don't have to listen to them. An application does not require having an impact municipality sign on with it. One person in the DEC drafts the permit and has the authority to overrule any other objections to the application. The DEC relies on lake associations, and I'll pause here to say that lake associations don't own the lake. Vermonters own our lakes. The DEC is now proposing rule changes as a reaction to the overwhelming opposition of spraying Vermont's largest in-state lake, Lake Bomazeen. The rule changes, and I've been around long enough to know what rule changes do, they won't correct an unjust process. They will most likely solidify the DEC's position on issuing permits. Specifically, the Lake Bomazeen Association Board, not their membership, filed an application with a co-applicant, the town of Hubbardton. The town of Hubbardton learned that they had been deceived in signing on to this application, and they specifically asked that their name be removed. I thought that would be the end of this application, and then only learned that it is not, because again, one person can make this happen. Since then, 4 municipalities have voted unanimously to oppose this application, and over 3,500 people have signed petitions in opposition to the application to spray Lake Bomazeen. In spite of this, the DEC could very well be issuing a permit against the town and the public's will. I don't know that they will, I don't know that they won't, but I know that they could. The law for dealing with an invasive species was implemented 20 plus years ago. The DEC relies heavily upon the EPA's approval of toxic chemicals. The same EPA that said a few years ago that the air was safe to breathe at 9/11 and that the air and water is fine in Ohio today. The DEC has opted to permit spraying toxic chemicals to eradicate milfoil without considering the impact that it has on our fish and our wildlife. because they don't have to statutorily. Milfoil has been around Vermont for 60 years, longer than some of us have been here. Probably not all of us, though. The DEC has been authorizing spraying of milfoil for about 20 years. The chemicals used 20 years ago did as much harm to native and rare plants as they did to milfoil. The health department found that one of the earlier chemicals might have health concerns, but the DEC still allowed its use. At least 3 or more toxic chemicals have been authorized for use in Vermont, and all 3 chemicals have been made by the same company, CPRO. We do not need rule changes. What we need is a timeout and a full re-examination of a flawed process. We need H31, a moratorium, so that all Vermonters can be educated and have their voices heard on this very important issue. I would like to ask Paul Burns from VPIRG to say a few words quickly. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. I'm Paul Burns. I'm the Executive Director of VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. We're the largest consumer and environmental advocacy organization in Vermont. We've been working on the issues of environmental protection, chemicals, pesticides for decades in Vermont. And I would just remind you that pesticides are one of the few products that we allow to be sold in commerce that, when used as directed, are intended to kill things, right? So that's why it makes sense to take a precautionary approach when we're thinking about the application of pesticides in our environment generally. And certainly when it comes to applying pesticides to some of our most revered water bodies. These are the places that Vermonters think about when they value and appreciate and love this state. And so this proposed legislation, we think, makes sense, as Bob says, as a timeout, to give an opportunity for thoughtful research and regulations to catch up with the toxic pesticides that are already in use, to give regulators a fair opportunity to consider the potential ramifications and the negative consequences of the use of these pesticides in these very precious water bodies. After all, we're concerned about the quality of the water, we're concerned about the environmental impacts, we're concerned about human health impacts as well. We believe that there would be benefits throughout the system if we were to take the time to evaluate effectively the use and consequences of these pesticides. So with that, I would just say again that VPIRG appreciates the work that all of these folks here and that the legislators who are helping to sponsor and co-sponsor this legislation are doing to introduce this idea, and we hope that it receives consideration and passage this year. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah.